Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, abridged in 1 volume. It's portable. Tasso. This word means to appoint, to order, with such nuances as to arrange, to determine, to set in place, to establish, to fix for oneself. I'm trying to see where, if they even mention. I don't even have a mention of it in here. No mention. That's it. That's all you get there. Interestingly enough, I went to the 26th translation. And there were only 2 variants. You are a priest forever, like Melchizedek. But the NEB is kind of interesting. You are a priest forever in the succession of Melchizedek. Here's it out there. Do you see? This is perhaps tonight the best thing that can come from this is humility. You know, we can get angry and say, why the translators do this? But you can see the vast majority. And if I would bring all of the commentaries on this, you go, whoa, how could you get such a diversity of things? So to be on the safe side, although I like Martin Luther's literal, according to the word of, or for the word's sake, I have to go with what is here. That is probably the most substantial. So in understanding after the manner, or according to the manner of Melchizedek, which I just mentioned, the NEB translator put succession. These are, words have meanings, and you have to be careful about which word you pick. So we could say, remember, the framework of this king, priest, warrior psalm, remember, we're still looking at the psalm as a whole. There's no question that the focus of the priesthood is what is the core of this verse 4. The question is, when it surfaces again in the New Testament, what will the meaning be? In other words, what should become clear is we know the embeddedness of what it is in the psalm. We have some idea of the difficulty of translation. I'm going to stick with the manner for reasons of safety right now. I don't want to be going out on a ledge. I do, as I say, like Martin Luther's translation for the word or according to the word. We have nothing about what Melchizedek said except for what he said that we know he said. He blessed Abram, and then he blessed God. I'm not done. I don't want you to think I'm done. But in the apocryphal literature, you got to go find these things to even see where people could come up with ideas or be influenced. So bear with me. I'm going to try and weave some stuff together here. First of all, and we will study these in the coming weeks, the rabbis, the Lech Lecha, and all of the commentators in the Midrashic and Talmudic commentaries, and you can pinpoint, as I said, the date when all of this stuff is coming out. It's just like a pipeline of commentaries. We're very quick to jump to attach Shem as Melchizedek. And even Martin Luther says that's I have no objection to that. He doesn't say he's convinced. He says I have no objection to that. And I wouldn't either if it wasn't for the fact of why this was propagated. And then that opens up other doors as to perhaps why this was propagated. But the clearest one, and I've said this before, for the Jewish concept of the priesthood in Judaism to be valid, certain criteria had to be met. Now, if someone is not reading the New Testament, and all they're going to read is the Old Testament, then they can make several deductions. Now, God would not, according to at least two Jewish commentators, God would not introduce somebody without telling us who he is. But that's not true. All you've got to do is look to Joshua 10 and the introduction of Adonai-Tzedek. We don't know where he came from, and yet he's king of Jerusalem. How did that happen? I don't know. So you got to be logical here. But it was important for the priesthood concept, if you are going to go down the pathway, and we'll examine Shem as Melchizedek. I'm going to let you be the judge once I put the information out on the table. I already have my own conclusion, which is, I would say, on the very high 90% mark, based on my research, that Shem and Melchizedek are not the same person. I know Dr. Scott believed that, and I believe that Dr. Scott, very much like Martin Luther, who came to a certain conclusion, not based upon going to Peel and fact find, but this was just something that it was plausible, therefore don't open the gate. Although Martin Luther does expand a little bit and say, but, and so we'll get into that. The rabbins, let's call them that. I don't want to keep saying the Jews or Judaism, because it's a certain community that was propagating. And you can see the time and the date in the literature. In order for Melchizedek to be Shem and be a priest forever, he had to have a genealogy. In other words, for Melchizedek to be a priest, to be accepted by them, because it's the first occurrence in the Pentateuch, he had to have a genealogy. Now, I wouldn't have any problem with that, except that the very same commentators who propagate this, if you read on to what they write, pose a very contradictive situation in their own arguments. And that is that according to them, if Shem is Melchizedek, he passed on his priestly blessing, he passed on the priesthood to Abraham. And in the very same literature, they say that you can't say that he's a priest forever, and then he lost his priesthood because he blessed Abraham first before he blessed God, and that's the argument within their own literature. So I'm just reporting. When you begin to see, how can you say this over here and then say that over there? So there's a lot of issues right there. Then you've got some other issues. If you read Jubilees, and somewhere in here, and I don't have it marked, but somewhere in here you have the record of Shem's, it's being referenced as Shem's sons are being referenced as the kings that fought. Please don't ask me. I'm just the reporter. I'm just the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger. If you take the time to read Jubilees, you'll find it in there. I'll mark it when I come back the next time on festival and read it to you. So it's pretty clear that you've got a lot of different things going on. Now, if you analyze the Targums, and the Targums are going to have their own situations. Some of the Targums refer to Shem as Melchizedek, some don't even mention him at all. Just agree on one thing. Just get together and agree on one thing. So you've got a lot of problems stemming from that. I can tell you, and I'm going to tip my hand a little bit, to understand what it means when it says without mother and without father and without genealogy, even though I put a genealogical mini table in my own handwriting of Noah and his sons and all the way down, that's not what it's referring to. What it is referring to in the big picture in the book of Hebrews, specifically the writer has a bird's eye view focused on the priesthood. His eyes are on the priesthood. Now, what on earth are we going to do with this? Because I'm trying to chisel away at this. It's like anyone who's worked around me knows that sometimes getting a job done can be pretty overwhelming if you look at the size of the task. But if you just chisel away at it a little bit, you eventually get there. And that's what we're doing right now. Okay. So I just jumped from one thing to another. I know I did that, but I know you're holding all the other thoughts on the table. Part of the reason why the writer of Hebrews says what he says, without mother, without father, without genealogy, etc., is it's latching on to his priesthood. The whole focus of mentioning Melchizedek is not to talk about the man or even to identify his person. It's referring to the priesthood, because the whole point of that 7th chapter is to reveal his priesthood and the purpose of his priesthood. I'm tipping my hand a little bit to you so you can follow a trail. That by the time the 8th chapter comes, he's done with the argument, he moves on. Now he's completely focused on Christ, although the 7th chapter is focused on Christ, using Melchizedek as a demonstration. Now, in the Old Testament, there were regulations for the priests. For the sons of Kohath from among the sons of Levi, and after their families by the house of their fathers, from 30 years old and upward, even until 50 years old, all that entered into the host do the work of the tabernacle of the congregation. So, for this particular group, 30 to 50, that's it. That's your service. That'd be a popular vocation nowadays if it was just 20 years. All right, then you read on, and you have those that were numbered the sons of Gershon throughout their families and by the house of their fathers, from 30 years old and upward, even unto 50 years old, every one that entereth into service for the work in the tabernacle of the congregation. And all those that were numbered the house of the families of the sons of Merari throughout their families, from 30 years old and upward, even unto 50 years old, every one that entereth into the service for the work in the tabernacle of the congregation. And then you read on, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, and this is that belongeth unto the Levites from 20 and 5 years old and upward, they shall go in to wait upon the service of the tabernacle of the congregation. And from the age of 50 years they shall cease waiting upon the service thereof, and they shall serve no more. There's a beginning, and there's an end. And when you stay focused on I'm doing two things at once. We're researching Melchizedek, we're probing all these things, but when you stay focused on the body of Hebrews and the purpose, you begin to see that the writer is focused on the priesthood, and some of the language that is being used makes our minds go off. Woo! Here is a limited priesthood, 25 years to 50 for the Levites. It's a beginning and an end. So when we talk about the priesthood, you can't just merely look at this, a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, and immediately the mind says, well, he was eternal and it lasted forever. Well, in the context of Hebrews, in the context of understanding this writing inspired by the Holy Spirit, David, we don't know when Melchizedek's priesthood started, and we don't know when it finished, because all we have is what we have. Without beginning? When did he start being a priest? Anybody know? When did he stop being a priest? Come on now. You're saying, is that it? Is that all? Well, no, but we're just chiseling away at this thing. Come on, give me a break. Without mother, without father, without descent, having neither beginning of days nor end of life. Well, wait a minute. Now that sounds like someone who's eternal. But wait a minute. Who says that the writer of Hebrews is even going to endeavor to speculate anything about the person other than what he knows is revealed, that his priesthood has something to do prior to the Levitical and Aaronic priesthood being established? So sometimes there's a very deceptive understanding. We can read something. Remember, I just highlighted, made like unto the Son of God. Like, similar, not the same. Now, I'm also going to say something else, so some of you will have less tension. There'll be more to come, but there'll be a little less tension. Why would the author spend so much time telling us, and not in direct prose, but for example, he made atonement, he purged our sins, and then he sat down at the right hand of the Father, the Majesty, which means, in another place he says, he ever liveth. Verse 25, 7:25, he ever liveth to make intercession for them. Why would the writer spend so much time telling us about Christ who lives? He is not dead. He lives. He's alive. Then try and introduce a concept which we in our mind, our interpretation is, he has no beginning of days or end of life. Why? Because there's nothing recorded for us. Now, do a little detective work. If Melchizedek is Shem, we have something recorded for us. We could at least say we have something. Just based on what is being written. Now, if you're not going to read the New Testament, you're only going to read the Old Testament, you can make all the speculations you want. You're going to speculate until you're speculating. We have no record of the beginning of his ministry, let's say it that way, and we have no record of the end of his ministry. We have no record of his death either, but he died. Well, how do you know he died? Because back there, you got to use some logic here sometimes. Back there, it says in chapter 5, no man taketh this honor unto himself. He's called of God, as was Aaron. He hasn't yet introduced his argument. But he goes on to make it clear. In fact, if you go back a little bit further, telling us about this, seeing then we have a great high priest. So we have this elevated person. Then we have the introduction of every high priest taken from among men is ordained for men in the things pertaining to God. All right, well, give me something else. You're not persuading me. Okay. We're going to keep chiseling away at this because I think you're going to find the conclusion is not so much the emphasis on the person. I'm taking liberty now to go off and take you on different areas to examine, because we can have tunnel vision and say, I've only read this and I only know this and that's that. No, we're not done. We are not done. So let me introduce. Where do I begin? All right. Let's introduce some passages to, whether you want to call it aiding understanding, crystallizing thought, or concluding the matter all together and just recognizing there's certain things that maybe we won't know, or maybe we will. All right. So here, we're going to start tonight. I'm going to introduce this tonight. It's called the Genesis Apocryphon, from a scroll from the wilderness of Judea. And you have here the name of two of the foremost, Avigad and Iadin. They, in combination with some other folks, Trevor and Millick. Goodness, there's a whole group of scholars that got to tackle these items, and I say tackle, but that's not really right. And how can this help us at all? That's really why you turn to these things. Well, you turn because you want to understand a little bit about them. I'm going to try and find a picture for you of what on earth we're looking at. So you can kind of see there's more than one way to find information out. All right. This is what the scroll looked like. It was in very bad condition to begin with. I mean, wonderfully preserved, so to speak, but not as good as some of the other scrolls. The Isaiah scroll, for example, was intact. And this is the outer casing. This is the unopened scroll. The right is the badly preserved side, and obviously the left is the better preserved side. It's like, which side looks better, right? Okay. And just so you can get an idea, the page that refers to this passage that is the equivalent to Genesis 14 forward looks like this. This is exactly the page that we would be dealing with. Okay? Now, what's interesting is the bulk of this text is actually decently, when you get further into Genesis, is decently preserved. But there are some things that we can glean out of this. I gave a little bit of the background to this material, but I would like to just read it, so if I made any errors in giving you the overview. We don't want the description of the scroll yet. I think I passed by the page that I want. This is dedicated, in fact, this book is dedicated to the gentleman who, when the scrolls went up for sale, he was the American businessman that purchased the scrolls out of the newspaper and brought them back to Israel. All right. So we know that the scrolls were found in 1947 with 6 other scrolls known as the first Qumran cave, 3 of the 7, Isaiah, the Thanksgiving scroll, the War of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness. They were acquired for the Hebrew University in 1947 by the late Professor E.L. Sukenik, who also wrote a lot of papers and writings on these finds. And other 4 scrolls, Isaiah, that would be an additional different Isaiah, Habakkuk commentary, the Manual of Discipline, and the present work, which is called the Genesis Apocryphon, were purchased by the Syrian Orthodox Metropolitan. His name is Mar Athanasius Samuel of St. Mark's Monastery in the Old City of Jerusalem. The Metropolitan who took the 4 scrolls to the United States in 1948 refused to permit American scholars. This is the school that I mentioned in Massachusetts, I believe, the Fogg Museum. He refused to permit American scholars to work on or publish this scroll, which was the most fragile of the 4 and very difficult to enroll. He insisted that all 4 must be first bought. Buy it, so if you break it, it's yours, right? He insisted that they must be bought. But because he had asked so large a sum and because of various other circumstances, the scrolls were made unpurchased, and the one here was not studied. Finally, in 1954, after negotiations conducted by one of the writers of this book, Yadin, Dr. Y. Yadin, with the assistance of a Mr. A. Harmon, then Consul General of Israel in New York, and Mr. T. Ben Nahum, the 4 scrolls were bought from the Metropolitan for the State of Israel. The purchase price, $250,000. Now, I want you to get some perspective. Today, if these scrolls ever, which they are, will never be made available, but if they were ever to be made available, we're talking about multiplied millions. Okay? I was just telling somebody before festival, I'm constantly finding things to acquire for our collection, and understanding the value of certain things. You acquire something and you know the value of something increases over time because there aren't more being made. In this case, this is a screaming rarity. So let me give you perspective. I'm going to say something that may seem a little ludicrous, but if it sold for $250,000 then, we're probably talking somewhere in the ballpark of about 50 million, maybe. You might say, well, that much? Yeah, it'd be, I would say conservatively, between 40 and $50 million. And only some large institution could buy that, could afford that. And you think that's crazy? Some of you are going, oh, I don't know about that. I'd like to give you perspective. There's a whole war currently, I mean, goes on. I know because I try and acquire things, whether it's out of private hands or whether it's out of auctions, and you can tell there's a handful of collectors. They are willing to pay any price to obtain. In fact, I have to just pause here to tell you a funny story. I will not mention names, but it's probably about 2 years ago. I was asked if I would have a meeting with this rather prominent person who deals in mostly antiquities and manuscripts primarily, who obviously was sorely mistaken about my interests, because they asked, well, you know, are the manuscripts for sale? Would you like me to take them off your hands? Really? No, there's nothing that's for sale there, you know. No. In fact, I've probably doubled the collection. No. Well, you know, we could probably make some, you know, it's just like, you know, listen, maybe I'm not the most articulate person in some areas, but I do understand value of certain things, and when you acquire something, especially something that is extremely rare, like the Wycliffe manuscript, there's only so many of those to be known existing intact as the one we have. And the one we have is very special because it belonged to a martyr who's in the Fox's Book of Martyrs. There's a very small window of things that you can discuss. Like if a full Gutenberg came on the market, there's only a handful of people that are going to vie for that, because there's only a handful of people that could actually afford that. One leaf just recently sold at an auction, just one leaf, for $250,000. One leaf. One. Not a book. One leaf. It's, you know, sort of smaller than this size, like that. So, man, if I would have lived back then, I mean, $250,000 in 1954, that was a lot of money, but you're looking at it now going, that's like a loaf of bread, it's like 5 cents, wow. The purchase price was $250,000. Could not have been met without some generous gift of $150,000 made for the purpose of the late Samuel Gottsman, who this book is dedicated to, whose untimely death took place during this year, and to whose memory this book is dedicated. And of course, there's all the people that they're going to thank. And they mention some people in here who it's very interesting, because these are all people who have contributed in writing to, you know, doing commentaries and pulling apart. While the scroll was still in the possession of Mar Athanasius Samuel, Professor Albright, who is the famed archaeologist, W.F. Albright, and Dr. Trevor, who is famed scholar in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and other scholars expressed the opinion that it contained the lost book of Lamech. Lamech, from the book of Genesis, Lamech. Because when they opened it, in the first few pages, there was a lot of references to Lamech. They hadn't gone any further, and they concluded that this is the book of Lamech. They reached this conclusion after they succeeded in deciphering the names Lamech and his wife, Bat Enosh, or depending on who translates it, Bet Enosh, on fragments which had become detached from the scroll. Can you imagine that? Like, imagine something that is so frail and brittle. I mean, I have such tremendous respect for antiquities. I wouldn't want to be the one touching that. You know, like one little press and oops, and a flake pops off. It's like that. Like, oh, okay, do you want to glue it back? Like, yeah, it's almost like the scribe who's right at the end of writing, and then he makes a mistake, and it's like, oh, got to start all over again, right? It's kind of like that, except worse, maybe. Scholars adopted this title, and the scroll is referred to as the Book of Lamech in most publications dealing with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Although this is a dated book, so that is not true. I have to qualify that. There are books that were printed after this time, and this was printed in 1956. Just as in, I believe it was in 1956, before this was widely circulated. I think I mentioned this. German professor Braun, he was doing a whole study on Qumran. He said that community was not interested at all with Melchizedek, but unbeknownst to him, au contraire, when all these things started to be released, there was good evidence that there was influence in at least 2 or 3 of the scrolls, and at least 2 or 3 direct scrolls dealing with the mention of the person Melchizedek. Sometimes going into these writings can give us a little bit of insight and fill in the blanks, and other times it ends up being a dead end. So they say here most of the publications refer to as the Book of Lamech, but subsequent publications refer to this under another title, which they may or may not get to. Yes, they will get to it. So, however, of course, if you look at the title of the book, that'll give it away. However, when we succeeded in opening it, we realized that Lamech is dealt with only in part of the book. The rest of it retells the story from Genesis in the manner of, in the way of the apocryphal literature. The chapters which are extant are concerned with Lamech, Enoch, Noah, Abram. Accordingly, we've decided to name the work a Genesis Apocryphon. All right. Since most of the columns are in very poor state of preservation, the process of deciphering them will inevitably be protracted. I stop there. After this work was done, a whole bunch of other people got on the bandwagon, and then subsequent technology was released, so there were certain things that at the time they opened the scroll, they were only looking with the naked eye. And then after that, other technology that was developed that let them see ink and ink traces, and you might say, well, just like, why would you want to spend your time looking at little dots to try and say, is that letter? But if it's one letter that's missing, you want to know what that one letter is, and that's what a lot of these scholars did. They spent their time, and then technology opened up a broader perspective for us. Since most of the columns are in very poor state of preservation, the process of deciphering them will inevitably be protracted. The scroll has, however, aroused so much interest and is actually of such importance that it was decided to publish this preliminary survey dealing mainly with the last 3 columns, which are very well preserved, which will take us to our columns. They're going to mention some people who produced and were, again, great scholars, De Bartolome, J.T. Millick. There's just a plethora of people who, if you were looking for the Dead Sea Scrolls English translation, a lot of people just turn immediately to Giza Vermes' translation. This is actually the English. Yes, this is the English. I got scared for a minute because I saw DuPont Summer and I thought, wow, this is the French version, but it's the English version, which is translated by Giza Vermes. And you get an idea. There's a lot of things that are missing. So when there are things that are missing, you have dot, 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 and blank. So imagine some of the areas that what we're dealing with, what we're concerned with, concerns column 22. Column 22 is, this whole plate is column 22. It's very well preserved. Now there's a little bit of a problem in, not so much, there's some wear and other things. The problem begins in, again, we come back to interpretation, but the content is pretty straightforward. Let's see if we can find it in one of these. This is another one of these people who's a giant scholar, contributing scholar, Florentino Garcia Martinez, the Dead Sea Scrolls translated. And this is kind of interesting. So I'm going to read you a little bit of what is said here. In fact, we'll probably tap into column 21 and 22, because the end of this is 22. And the end of this ends exactly the way Dr. Scott would have ended it. Someone who has left blank. Okay, that's exactly the way the page ends. So let me get situated here. I don't know, maybe this doesn't interest you. This is interesting to me. I think this is really fascinating. Give some detail, some things that make no sense and other things that make great sense here. Where do I want to read from? I should start at column 21 and read through 22 because they're pretty much intact, but I'm going to do that after you get on the telephone. Okay, I'm not going to go off on this trail of what I'm about to say tonight because it's another subject. But within the study of the Dead Sea Scrolls, you've got people who are experts at analyzing the language. They're language experts. And this is, I will not do this to you because it's its own pathway. But one of the experts, this is dated, this is not new. This is not a new piece of material. It's from 1957. But this scholar by the name of Kutcher, who's an expert in the language of the Genesis Apocryphon. It's very interesting how you, as you get into an area, there are people that are specialized, and it's very important for me, even if I don't go into all the details of all the things that I study, to make sure that I know all the players. You'll see that every time I touch a subject, no matter what it is, I want to be able to know what they said, what their conclusions were. They may not influence me because I'm going to come into it picking and looking, and I want to know. I want to be informed. If somebody says, well, what did somebody say on that? Well, this person's conclusions were this dates to this time, and the evidence is in the writing, or it's in the ink, or it's in the scroll itself, in the material of the scroll. So you can get a good picture. Here's another one of these. This one is in French, and this kind of made me very happy because it's got some wonderful footnotes. Here we go. This is a commentary of sorts on Abraham's meeting Melchizedek. But it's what is being said here. There's some very interesting notes that probably caught my attention more than anything here. For example, in this footnote here regarding Melchizedek as the king of Salem, and he says here, even the identification of Salem with Jerusalem Salem is identified with Jerusalem in Flavius Josephus, and he gives the place, and also he also cites the Targums and so forth. So there's some interesting footnotes here on what is said, the Targums of Onkelos and the Targums of Jonathan, but not those of Jerusalem, pass on the silence of the priesthood of Melchizedek. At the same time, they identify Salem with Jerusalem. There's all these different interesting footnotes in here, but it's all in French. This is another one of these experts, Carmignac, Gauthenet, and Lignier. Just a sidebar of all the interesting goodies that you can. I have one more down there, which I'm saving. Actually, there's a whole carload out there, but some people fill their car with groceries. Some people fill their, I don't know, mine's filled with books. All right, I'm going to read just columns 21 and 22, so you can be familiar with the Genesis events. Some of this will sound very familiar, and others, there'll be some additions and some things in here. We'll just listen along. I have to start back up just a little bit. So where do we start here? Oh, I actually have to go back to Hagar. Sorry. This is after they were in Egypt, and it was revealed that Sarai was his wife and not his sister. The king gave her much gold and silver and many clothes of fine linen and purple. If you're interested, by the way, the beginning of column 20, which is an earlier section, describes in great detail Sarai. But it's family hour. Bunch of perverts. I have a feeling copies of this Dead Sea Scrolls translated are going to be flying off the shelf. Okay. So the king gave her much gold and silver, many clothes of fine linen and purple. And in front of her, and also Hagar, he handed her to me, speaking of Sarai, and appointed men to escort me out of Egypt. I, Abraham, walked with much cattle and also much silver and gold. I left Egypt, ... Lot, my brother's son, was with me. Lot, too, had acquired many flocks and had taken for himself a wife from among the daughters of Egypt. These little tidbits here. Yeah, of course Lot would have a wife. Come on. I camped with him in all my old campsites until I reached Bethel, the place where I had built an altar, and I built it once again. Upon it I offered holocaust, burnt offerings, and an offering to the God Most High, and invoked the name of the Lord of the universe there. I praised God's name and blessed God. I gave thanks there in God's presence for all the flocks and wealth which he had given me, because he had acted well towards me, and because he had returned me in peace to this land. There's a blank, there's a space. After that day, Lot parted from me on account of the behavior of our shepherds. So if you were questioning, this sounds very similar, right? It's very close. Up till now we've got some information, but it's very close to the Genesis account. He went and settled in the Jordan, taking all of his flocks with him, and I even added many to his. He pastured his flocks and reached Sodom and bought himself a house in Sodom, and he lived there, while I lived in the mountain of Bethel. It distressed me that Lot, my brother's son should have parted from me. Blank, blank, blank. That's what, there's really blanks there. God appeared to me in a night vision and said to me, go up to Ramat Hazor, which is north of Bethel, the place where you are living. Raise your eyes and look to the east, to the west, to the south, and to the north. Look at all this land which I am giving you and your descendants forever. The following morning I went up to Ramat Hazor and looked from the land that height, from the river of Egypt unto Lebanon and Senir, and from the great sea up to Horan, and all the land of Jebel up to Kadesh, and all the great desert which there is to the east of Horan and Senir as far as the Euphrates. And he said to me, I shall give all this land to your descendants, and they will inherit it forever. I will multiply your descendants like the dust of the earth, which no one can count. Remember, somebody had to translate this from the Aramaic, so use of words like dust or sand, we don't know until we were going to pick. We'd have to examine the text ourselves. I'm just reading the translation. In the same way, your descendants will be innumerable. Get up, walk its length and breadth, and see how great its length and how great its width. For I shall give it to you and to your descendants after you for all the centuries. Blank, blank. Imagine if God spoke like that. And blank, blank. I, Abram, went out to traverse and see the land. I began the traverse at the river Gihon. I went along the edge of the sea until I reached the mountain of the bull. That's really important. There's a little clue right there that the mountain of the bull, which if you were reading from different sources, that becomes really very important in the Canaanite world, because the god of the bull was associated with Baal, bull and Baal. The mountain of the bull, which, by the way, if on a separate note, if you were studying the Canaanite gods, you'd find that within the Canaanite society, and even within that bed, Ur and other areas, El was known. El was just not known as El as revealed in the scriptures as we know El, but El was known. Well, we're going to have to talk about that too eventually, so just all right. All right, I walked from the coast of this great sea of salt, skirting the mountain of the bull towards the east, through the breadth of the land until I reached the river Euphrates. I proceeded towards the east along the banks of the Euphrates until reaching the Red Sea. I continued walking along the shore of the Red Sea until arriving at the branch of the Sea of Reeds, which issues from the Red Sea, and continued towards the south until I reached the river Gihon. There's quite a bit of detail here. Then I turned back and I arrived at my house in peace. I guess maybe it's a tent. And found everyone well. That's good to know. I went and settled next to the oaks of Mamre in Hebron and to the northeast of Hebron. There I built an altar, and upon it I offered a holocaust and an offering to the God Most High. And I ate and drank there, and all the people of my household. I invited Mamre, Armin, Eshcol, and the 3 Amorite brothers, my friends, and they ate together with me and drank with me. Blank, blank. There's really a blank there. They didn't drink and become blanks. It was just, they drank with me, blank, blank. Before those days, there came Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Amraphel, king of Babylonia, Arioch, king of Cappadocia. I don't know if you can see the differences from Genesis, if you're familiar with some of the definitions and names. The names are the same. It's their cities. Tidal, king of Goim, which is Mesopotamia. And they declared war on Bera, king of Sodom, and Birsha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Semiabad, king of Zeboim, and king of Bela. There's some additions there if you're even following along or trying to follow along in Genesis in the King James. All these formed an alliance to do battle in the valley of Siddim. However, the king of Elam and the kings allied with him were victorious over the king of Sodom and his allies, and they imposed tribute on them. Over 12 years they continued paying their tribute to the king of Elam, but in the 13th year they revolted against him. In the 14th year the king of Elam positioned himself at the head of all his allies. They climbed up the desert road and were ravaging and laying waste from the river Euphrates. They routed the Rephaites of Ashtaroth Kernim, the Zuzamites of Ammon, the Enim of Shaveh Kirathaim, the Horites of Mount Jebel, until they reached El Paran in the desert. They returned blank blank in Hazazon Tamar blank. The king of Sodom went out to meet him. You know, this is going to be really good on radio. Nobody may know that I'm actually reading from a book, but I'm reading from a book, so when I say blank blank, it's because there are pieces missing from the scroll. That was for radio purposes only. The king of Sodom went out to meet them together with the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela. They engaged battle in the valley of Siddim against Kedolaomar and the allies who were with him. But the king of Sodom was defeated and fled. The king of Gomorrah fell in the pits. The king of Elam pillaged all the property of Sodom and of Gomorrah, and they captured Lot, the son of the brother of Abraham. It changed from first person to, then it went to second person, or narration, who was living in Sodom. Did you see the transition? Went from first person to a narrative. Together with them and all of his cattle. One of the shepherds of the flock which Abram had given Lot, who had escaped captivity, came to Abram. At that time, Abram was living in Hebron, and told him that Lot, the son of his brother, and all of his flocks had been captured, but that he was not dead. And that the kings had taken the road of the great valley up to his city, taking prisoners, ravaging, killing, and proceeding as far as the city of Damascus. I want you to think about this. If this is even remotely possible, if you can envision where Damascus, the distance, this is a great trek and a great, they must have been making devastation. I mean, as far as Damascus, that's pretty far. Abram wept for Lot, the son of his brother. Abram gained courage, stood up, and chose from among his servants those most fit for war, 318. Arnem, Eshcol, and Mamre were with him. He went in pursuit of them until he reached Dan and found them camped in the valley of Dan. He fell upon them by night from all four sides. He killed some during the night. He destroyed them and chased them, and they were all fleeing from before him until they reached Helbon, which lies north of Damascus. He retrieved from them all that they had captured, and all that they had looted, and all their own goods. He also saved Lot. Wah, wah. His brother's son. And all his flocks, and brought all back the captives that they had taken. The king of Sodom heard that Abram had brought back all the captives and all the loot, and went up to meet him. Now, these are some little details that actually seem quite important, because not having had the details of what was completely taken in Genesis, it makes perfect sense now that the king of Sodom would go back. It's just simply introduced to us in the King James Version. He fled, and now he's back. So it seems perfectly clear here. There's some small pieces of information that are quite helpful. The king of Sodom heard that Abram had brought back all the captives and all the loot, and went up to meet him. He went to Salem, which is Jerusalem. I'm not commenting on that, because that seems pretty solid through and through. Everybody seems to say the same thing, and I'm not going to even bother fighting that. Abram was encamped in the valley of Shaveh, which is the valley of the king, the valley of Bet HaKerem. Just exactly the way the King James, exactly the way the Masoretic text. Here we go, right in here. Melchizedek, king of Salem, It's kind of interesting. Brought out food and drink. It's like an entertainment service. Brought out food and drink for Abraham and all the men that were with him. That would have to be a whole lot of food and drink. 318 of his own men plus whatever the captives that he brought back. That's a whole lot of food and drink if you take this side of the story. It's very interesting. He was a priest of the Most High God. He blessed Abraham and said, "Blessed be Abram by the Most High God, Lord of heaven and earth." And there's some subtleties here in the text. Your King James has in it, see if I could find my own Bible here and open it to the right place. There's some subtleties in the text that may or may not break anything. There's subtleties in translation, perhaps. The word for possessor of heaven and earth, blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. That word for possessor has been scrutinized because it's not insinuating creator. So just kind of put a footnote there for a minute. And here we have an addition, Lord of heaven, Most High God, Lord of heaven and earth. So there are some textual differences. It's not gross by any kind. There's just this small portion here that's going to come and go as quickly as the King James. So, blessed be Abram by the Most High God, Lord of heaven and earth, and blessed be the Most High God, who has delivered your enemies into your hands. And Abram gave him a tithe of all the flocks of the king of Elam and his allies. Blank, blank, blank. Then the king of Sodom approached and said to Abram, "My lord Abram," remember I was referring earlier to the translation of Adonai. This would be a perfect case in point of Adonai. "My lord Abram, give me the people who are mine, who are captive with you, whom you have rescued from the king of Elam. All the wealth keep for yourself." Then Abram answered the king of Sodom, "I swear this day by the Most High God, Lord of heaven and earth, that I will not accept a thread or a sandal thong." I'm glad he specified it was a sandal thong. "Or anything of what belongs to you, including your thong, so that you will not say, 'From my wealth do Abram's riches come, apart from what my boys who escort me have eaten, and apart from the share of the 3 men who came with me.'" And this is an interesting fact. He mentions the 318 men and the 3 men that were with him. And in the King James, all we have here is armed, trained servants, born in his own house, 318, pursue them unto Dan. So it's kind of interesting that we've got these 3 persons. Now, I don't know, could this be an amalgamation of sorts from a future chapter down the road where it talks about which I do believe is a theophany of sorts, of the 3 appearing to him, at his tent, not the 3, but the appearance. He says he was by the tent, and the Lord is speaking to him. I think that's in 18. Sat in his tent, lifted up his eyes, lo, 3 men. That's exactly where it is in verse 18, in chapter 18, verse 2. 3 men stood by him. I'm not sure if this is a confusion or whatnot. Not that it does anything, but these are the things you have to observe when you're reading. Well, these 3 men, where'd they come from? So we have just a little bit to read. I might as well read to the end of this. "After these events, God appeared to Abram in a vision and said to him." Now, I pause here for a reason. Because once you've seen this, and this seems to be pretty, for the most part, other than the few things I've mentioned in passing, it's very solid to the framework of Genesis. It's very close. There's a few words that are off. So why am I highlighting this? What's the point of highlighting this? Well, this will be on equal plane with another piece of Qumran information. Now this is how you weigh out information, because they both came from the same cache. So if this is a valid source and close to Genesis, the other source that we're going to look at that has its own identity of Melchizedek needs to be examined in the same light. Can it hold the same weight? Because we're not going to be dealing with a Genesis story or Genesis event. We're going to be dealing with something that is completely outside the pale, which looks to a future time. So the question is this text reliable? And is this text juxtaposed to the scroll we need to look at that references Melchizedek? These are the two main sources. Are they reliable sources? Do they corroborate? Do they contradict? So thus far we have a few pieces here. We have some interesting additions, but there's nothing on the surface that seems to be grossly contradicting the Genesis account. You'd agree, right? Good. Let me finish this and then I can come to the end with the blank blanks. So, let's read here. After these events, God appeared to Abram in a vision and said to him, "See, 10 years have passed since the day you left Haran." That's information we don't have in here. You spent 2 years here, 7 in Egypt, and 1 since you came back from Egypt. That's kind of interesting chronology. Now inspect and count up all you possess, and see how many times everything which left with you on the day of your move from Haran has increased. Now do not fear. I am with you, and I shall be your support and strength. I shall be your shield and your buckler. You know that's chapter 15. Your shield and buckler against one stronger than you. Your riches and your flock shall increase enormously. Blank, blank. Abram replied, "My Lord God, great are my riches and my flocks, but what use is all this to me? When I die, I shall go naked and without sons. One of my servants will inherit from me, Eliezer, blank, blank." But he answered him, "He will not inherit from you, but someone who has left blank." So talk about a cliffhanger. If you were dependent on this to find out what's going to happen, can you imagine that? What's going to happen? So I introduced this tonight because this will be a text I'm going to refer to in examining another text within the Qumran scrolls. If you're interested, this has to be the most complete and probably the most incredible work on the Genesis Apocryphon by Joseph Fitzmyer. And this, I don't know if you remember, when Dr. Scott was teaching out of Romans, he would read a lot out of Fitzmyer's commentaries from the Anchor Bibles, that red-covered commentary. He used to read a lot out of that commentary, and he really put a high premium, even though this fellow here is either a Jesuit or something, Catholic University of America, Jesuit community, Georgetown University, but incredible scholarship. And this is no different. This is the third, I think the third edition of this work. This one was done in 2004. It was revised because there were subsequent finds, but it's very thorough. And what it does is it gives you an introduction. It tells you a little bit about the dating of the text. It explains a little bit of why you should care. Has a supreme bibliography in it. Really just, it's pages upon pages. And then what he's done is he's taken the time to give side by side, which is much appreciated certainly for people who do not read. And obviously you can tell here using the Aramaic Hebrew, you do not have the luxury of vowels, but you've got the original language and then his translation side by side, which is quite interesting. And then if that wasn't enough, this is the type of scholarship that even if somebody goes off on other planets, the work is incredible. After he's done the side-by-side, as I just showed you, he actually does a column-by-column commentary and analysis on each line, comparing it to the text that we use, and juxtaposing it with other texts, other apocryphal literatures, a brilliant, brilliant scholarship. And then he's got some related literature. And what is really great is at the back of the book, in the appendix, you've got orthography, and actually the area that grabbed me the most, which was he's got a whole section on all the particles and all the nouns, and it's all syntax related, it's all syntactical. But the glossary is all of the Aramaic words and where you might find them in the text. So hypothetically, if you were looking for Tzedek, if you were looking for Salem, and I did that. I went through and I was searching all the words that were within our 2 or 3, here it's 2 verses, I think, to see how many times they were used within the body. Are they being described the same? For example, I'll give you an example of this as to why somebody would go to the trouble to do this. Or I may be a little bit crazy, but I think you have to be a little bit crazy to study and dig in. So, for example, I looked up the word Salem or Shalem. Shalem, Salem, Salem. There's no vowels and Shem. So you've got all of these. And then you have their occurrences. So it's somewhat interesting that they're not all translated the same way. Remember, there's no vowels to distinguish. So, for example, I'm sorry, I was pointing at above. It was a T and not a mem. So starting at the right place, upside down, it's hard to read Hebrew. We have Salem, to be complete, to come to an end, to restore. Then safe, peace, perfect. Salem as come to pass. So you can kind of see how that one word without vowel points was being translated. So there's just an incredible tool. And then he's got a list of modern authors, index of subject and biblical passages. In terms of scholarship, it's a slightly mind-boggling piece of work. But if you're interested, that's what I was reading from, and the English version by Martinez. And so now you're saying, wow, now that we've encountered the Genesis Apocryphon, what should we be looking for to know what's coming down the road? Because there's more to say on Melchizedek coming out of this same source. What should we be looking for? And I will tell you after you get on the telephone. Now, I'm sure most of you did not know there was this much stuff. This is only a few books. This I had to beg, borrow, and steal to get a copy of this. Let's see if I can find the beginning of this. Now, I will not, it's too late for me to read this to you because it's not only in French, not that I mind, but trust me, I have people, I'm trying to keep you awake. But this begins a section in this work. This is called Revue Biblique from 1927. And there are 2 articles. This is the same thing from 1926. Told you I had to move a lot of bodies to get this. I think these came from Paris. Is that where they came from?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah? Okay. This fellow's got an awful lot to say. In fact, he does a commentary. Gustave Bardi. Which I think what I will do is I will probably make a good stab at doing a rough English translation for you, so I'm not having to stumble through and do it as I go. But there's something that just leaps off this page here, which has nothing to do I've just left the Genesis Apocryphon right now, because I at least want to introduce this to tell you there's just a whole lot of stuff out there. And some of you may have said, okay, well, Pastor, you showed that Christ is not Melchizedek. And I think so, most of you are convinced. Most of you. Just on the face of everything, it makes no sense for the writer of Hebrews to make Christ and Melchizedek the same person if he's going to make an argument for how much better. It doesn't make sense. It's just logic right now. Nothing but logic. But here's one for you that's equally interesting. I'll read it, just this one line here. Entre autres opinions étranges, and in other strange opinions, some have professed to say that Melchizedek was the Holy Spirit, le Saint-Esprit. And he has a whole, it just it goes on, of strange opinions. What did Jerome say? What did, he calls him Hippolyte, but Hippolytus, Eusebius, etc., etc. He's got it all laid out here. Probably wish I would have gotten this before I comb through all of my, that 40-volume set of church fathers. Would have made life so much easier, but that's okay. But I think he cites them all in here, so I may just rough hand translate what he's done, so I'm able to sit here and essentially read a translation to you straight without stopping of what he has said. But he does come to some interesting conclusions about who is Melchizedek. So that's something we'll have to pick up, right? Oh, you're saying, stop already. Stop. No, please don't stop. It's like, I said this to you, there's so much information. It's not going to do a darn thing with regard to what happens in the book of Hebrews. Because everything that you need to know in the book of Hebrews is actually there in the book of Hebrews. Well, what? Why bother? Let me tell you something. What I see crystal clear, a lack of understanding of Psalm 110 led to a lot of misinterpretation about Melchizedek into the early 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries of the church. And when you examine the evidence, you can see how, if a person did not understand the person speaking in the psalm, and if they didn't necessarily understand, well, okay, I just keep putting stuff out there tonight, and you can say, are you done? No. But think of it this way. Who was the priesthood, the Levitical priesthood to? Who were they priest to? Which people? Anybody want to tell me? Children of Israel, right? We're not talking about Jews. They became Jews later. That's way, way later. We're just talking about children of Israel. The whole camp, right? They were ministers. And through the ages, that ministry, we'll call it that Levitical ministry, tunneled down into when the kingdoms split and the people become known as Jews. There's still a priesthood ongoing, but down the road from that, this ministry will exclude the Gentiles. Correct? Was Abraham a Jew? Oh, thank goodness. All right. Here comes Melchizedek ministering to Abraham. I want you to think of this. As a prototype of Christ, we have a ministry, not Jew, Hebrew, but not Jew. In other words, had it not been for this concept laid out clearly in Hebrews. For we see Christ becomes our high priest, and he is high priest both to the Jews that then are converted as well as to the Gentiles. But that could have never been under the Levitical priesthood. So the significance of Melchizedek ministering to Abraham has manifold facets to it, including the fact that it was not only before the law, but for lack of terminology, it's going to sound wrong, but it was a Gentile priesthood. And I say that outside of the realm of, even though the children of Israel are going to be coming down from and descending from Abraham. But if you understand what I'm saying, it was before the establishment that then, at a time when the priesthood was lined up, that ministry was to an exclusive group of people, and those outside of that realm could never be included. So what Melchizedek represents in Hebrews is a prototype again. There's all these prototypes. He represents a prototype of a ministry of a high priest who is high priest to the nations, if you will, not just to this one stream of people and closed and everybody else is locked out. So you've got all these beautiful prototypes in there, but you've got to look. And so when people quickly read over, they jump to fascinating conclusions. There's a whole section in Calvin and in Luther and in many of these, and probably the Roman Catholic commentators were the worst offenders on this to bring forth the idea that even though we're familiar with wine and bread, even though that sounds great and it sounds like a type, like the type of the Lord's Supper, I'm sure these are emblems. He's a priest of the Most High God. These are emblems. But people have taken that and tried to stretch it really, really far. That's the one thing Martin Luther did pick up on, tried to stretch it really, really, really far to make it be something perhaps we don't have beyond that. But there's certain things we do know about this person that in the framework, when you start to line it all up with all of these outside pieces of information, it becomes crystal clear that Melchizedek was important to this community being written to, these Hebrews, whoever they are, to make them understand that while they were pining to go back to the old ways and to tradition and to whatever else they were accustomed to, this was established and this was a better way. This is what's being said. But in between the lines, there's some very profound things. We can walk away with a crystal clear idea. The writer of Hebrews had some significant insight into the person of Melchizedek, which, if not examined, as I say, the rabbis did not, they'd completely miss out. So luckily, we have something to dig from and many auxiliary sources to play with. But the foundational piece that will be the most relevant for us is the prototype concept. So if you're still thinking, well, it is going to be great because we're going to keep going. I've got much more information and much more stuff to put out there. But all you have to do is look to a little bit ahead in Hebrews, where the writer's talking about Moses, when the Lord spoke to Moses, and he says, build a tabernacle. He didn't say build a temple. Of course, Moses didn't build a temple, he built a tabernacle, but you'd think at the time he was writing, he'd be more interested with the temple than he would with the tabernacle, but he uses the tabernacle and he says, see to it that you build it exactly. And the writer of Hebrews is using this again to show prototype. So that is woven in there, and you have to look at diverse places to find it. It's in there over and over again, as if to say, now I'm going to tell you that before Christ came in the flesh, God was putting all of these beautiful pictures and shadows out there, prototypes of the real thing that you have been given to you. Now hold on to that, hold fast. Now you kind of get the idea of putting all of Hebrews together now. Hold on to that which you've received, so much better than the things that were before. Hold fast to that. Hold on. Don't let go. How shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? So you can see there's a real purpose for this chapter, and it's not fanciful dabblings, but it'll bring a crystallized picture of what the writer was trying to get those people to see, and what we can glean from this is superb. I hope you'll keep watching. Right now I need you to get on the telephone.
Come to this house.